Welcome back, everyone, to the post-break session. We are ready to begin with the session on opportunities and outlook for offshore wind in China. For this session, we have with us Mr. Joseph Deng. He's China representative with the World Forum Offshore. Mr. Deng has more than 20 years of renewable energy experience. He's a specialist in renewable energy projects and with a good understanding of renewable energy technologies such as onshore and floating offshore wind. Mr. Deng has helped manage relationships with large investors and state-owned companies for wind energy projects in EU countries. As a market maker and researcher, he is responsible for identifying and shaping business opportunity, identifying commercial opportunity, reducing risk, and developing solutions, providing support to executive leadership, and formulating a business case for decision making. We'll like to have Mr. Deng's presentation up, Richa, and so he can begin with his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Deng.
Thank you. You hear me okay, everybody?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Good. Thank you to invite me again this year. It's the second year we joined this event. My name is Joseph Deng. I'm working for a organization called WFO. We focus on offshore wind. I'll give you more detail later, but this afternoon I will focus on the report we produce every year, but we're focused on Chinese wind sector plan, policy, and development. Next slide, please. As a non-profit organization, which founded not many years ago, we always only focus on offshore wind. And as far as we know, there's only one organization like us. We focus on offshore wind only. We are very lucky in just a few years. We have a lot of good quality members to join us, so we can really happy to claim we can represent the whole complete offshore wind value chain. I will show you some representative company later. We also just have a few new offices in New York, Tokyo, and Taipei. Originally, we only have 2 offices, one in Hamburg, one in Singapore. Next slide, please. I'm sure a lot of the audience here have been heard about, okay, the value chain, the supply chain, the policy, the government's subsidy, the funding, the money. But if you been in this industry long enough, highly likely you come to the same conclusion, which means it's all down to the government level, because we're talking about a very expensive investment infrastructure to transform from the carbon-based to renewable, and there are a lot of gap between the local government, the different country, and even I think recently people start talking about this information. You might think, oh, why? It's renewable. Okay, so you just get the power from the wind, the sun. Is no-brainer. It's simple and easy. But unfortunately, there are a lot of disinformation or propaganda in the internet, the Twitter, everywhere. So that's why we do need some organization to provide the facts and based on science to put all these things right. Also, we normally will have an annual offline conference, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to do that in the last 2 years. Next slide, please. Here's a few company we've been involved with. One thing I want to mention here, in our organization, we have, I think at the moment, 4 to 5 subcommittees. Each committee will have a monthly meeting with different agenda in their own supply chain or value chain or different sector. And each of the subcommittee will have a chair from one of the most famous company in that sector. And every half year or maybe a year, they will produce some report, which will be freely available to the whole industry. I'll give you some example later. Next slide, please. For example, the report I'm talking about this afternoon is the Global Offshore Wind Report. We produce this report every 6 months. So hopefully we can be more updated compared to other organizations produce annual report. And also, as I mentioned before, with some of our subcommittee, for example, the O&M subcommittee just published their O&M report 2 months ago, which will be freely available on our website. And we have our insurance subcommittee, also will give us some guideline in that industry. Next slide, please. Next, we will dive into the 2021 Global Wind Report, which I will focus on China, obviously. Before I start, I would like to make a very clear point here. If you look at the headline number, I'm sure some of you already come across with so many different reports this year already. You will see the number we produce here is a little bit less than some other organization or some other countries' number, because we have our own definition of each of the term. For example, operation, only all the turbine installed and the first electricity being generated, and then we can count this as in operation. You see more of this different number later. So let's look at the annual capacity in operation accumulated. It's a very steady growth from 2012 to 2021. The total capacity at the moment, as far as we believe, is 48.2 gigawatts. And 40% of them, which is 19.7, is now installed in China. But as I said before, the headline number from the National Statistics Bureau from China is 26 gigawatts. We'll talk about that later. And because of the feed-in tariffs deadline, the second half of 2021, we will never see a growth in offshore wind in one country with such a huge number before, which is China. So after this rushing to connect, we have totally almost 14 gigawatt capacity in China with the vast build out. But if you look at the detail of each of the wind farm, worldwide there's about 215, and half them in Europe, half them in Asia, majority is in China, only 2 in America at the moment. Next slide, please. Now we look at the annual act offshore wind capacity. Basically, this is what we take the differences between each year from the last graph you have. We can see not a huge growth from 2012 to 2015, and then 16 there's a dip because of Europe, there's some feed-in tariffs slowdown, and then we have a very steady growth from 17 to 20. But it's no surprise for the last 8 years. But 2021, here we see that 15.7 gigawatts of global offshore wind capacity in 1 year because of the expiration of the Chinese feed-in tariff. We will talk about this in detail later. But if we look at the statistics again, globally, there are 53 new offshore wind farms in operation in 2021. 45 of them is in China, 3 in UK, 2 in Netherlands, 1 in Denmark, 1 in Taiwan, 1 in Norway. Statistically, most of the work is being done in China. But if we look at the average size of the newly installed wind farm during the 2021, which is only smaller than compared to the last year, because last year the average size is 347 megawatt, even though the total capacity is not as big as this last year, but 296 really reflect the reason because of the size of most of the wind farm in China, which connect this year, is quite small. It's between 200 and 300 megawatts. This is the reason why we see that change. And again, we will only can the turbine is fully installed and first power as operation. Next slide, please. If we divided all the data into different countries, obviously, the first, the highest installed capacity is from China. The headline number we have is 19.7. I think the reason, the difference between the number we have in the China National Energy Administration is about 4 gigawatt difference. We believe there's 12 gigawatts in total installed this year, but their number is 16.9. Well, it's almost 4 or 5 gigawatt difference. It's huge difference. But if we still can see the trend, which is the total installation number. Last year is quite high. So we don't want to go into too much detail of each of the wind farm, why we didn't count this one, why we have to count that. I don't think that's important here. But anyway, China is now the world's largest offshore wind farm market, by far, with almost all the installed capacity as the UK and Germany combined. But we do see some different change might happening soon, because I think Boris Johnson, Prime Minister from UK, just made some announcement. I think 95% of the electricity coming from renewable. I think they claim they want to have 50 gigawatts in 2030, and France as well with the president. I don't know what the election result yet, but I think they claim another 50 gigawatts. So we will see Germany again after all these years not growing that much because of what happening in Ukraine. Maybe I think their policy have a big shift to the policy now. So hopefully in the next few years we will not only see China but also Europe, Germany, UK will come into the market as well. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go into the detail of what is our observation of the Chinese offshore market in 2021. I think it's useful for us to look into, just like we have different actors in this market. The most dominant important actor, of course, is the Chinese government, because they're making policy. And then the second level is the major developer who will own the asset, who will follow the order from the central government to implement what law or policy they want the utility to do. And then the third level is the supply chain, and then the last one is the consumer. So we look at the Chinese offshore market from all these different angles, different points. The first observation is most after all these years development, the offshore wind is okay. China is #1 now in the world, but if you look at the major developer, they are all state-owned enterprise utility, and most of their assets is mainly in China. If you compare to other similar size company in Europe, you will see they try to diversify their assets in different country, different continent to mitigate the political risk, but this is not the case in China. Because of the 2021 deadline for the feed-in tariff, officially it's already parity area in China for the offshore wind power now, including onshore and offshore. But they are a very important message. I don't think we can ignore that. Only a few years, this feed-in tariff scheme been operating in China. It's already have accumulate almost $500 billion Chinese RMB payment have been not been paid to the developer or the owner of the wind farm. But people might ask, how come this will not be possible in for example, in UK? Because The Chinese feed-in tariff scheme is similar to the UK feed-in tariff scheme many years ago. You basically just have a meter in your wind farm, and then every month, maybe every few weeks, you will receive the payment from the grid. But it's not that case. It's not the case in China here. They are a very complicated. I can't get into too much detail, but the result is they are almost $500 billion RMB payment been delayed. But the good news is, I think the Treasury already makes some very strong statement. It should be resolved very soon with one-off payment. So this is very important. As imagine if you any of the utility company invest a lot of money with your own balance sheet and then relying on the feed-in tariff to cover some of your costs. But if you just keep accumulating this late payment and not sure whether this payment can come in, you will bring in a lot of trouble. The third observation we have is the local offshore policy. As I mentioned before, the most important actor or player in the Chinese offshore market is the central government. But the local government now have to be in the center stage, because it's very clear the central government will not pay any more money for the feed-in tariff, because the feed-in tariff is officially finished. So it's up to the local government to put the bill. But we can, if you spend enough time to go into talk to enough people, you have a kind of feeling. The local government think, okay, we don't think we are the ones should pay this, because number one, they might not have the budget to do that. Number two, there are lots of different factors. For example, if I may expand a little bit, let's say Guangdong. Guangdong is quite a wealthy province area in China. They are the first local government to make announcement after the central government's support scheme finished. But if you look at the money they committed to pay, is far from enough. Let's say maybe just between 5 to 10% of the original central government support. So if you put into the content, there's still around 7 gigawatts in construction offshore wind farms not being connected, with only 5 to 10% support, and majority of them is in Guangdong and Jiangsu. We'll talk about that later. So this will create uneasy or uncertainty in the market, obviously. Number 4 observation we have is the cost. Of course, it's always people expect the offshore value chain will mature, the price will drop. You can see the example from Europe, in UK, for example, in the last 10 to 15 years. It's already happening in China, but it's not happening fast enough. If you take example, a typical internal rate of return the offshore project for 7%, in the most important 4 areas, Jiangsu, Guangdong, Fujian, and Zhejiang, roughly we do a calculation, we come down to the cost reduction must be 10, 30, 20, or 40%. So the average is between 25, 30%. It's still a huge margin. It needs to be reduced. So when this pressure come in, how the market or the supply chain have the feedback, we don't know yet. But at least I think at least this year, for about after the feed-in tariff finished in China, about 8 to 9 months, is no bidding, is no tender process for offshore wind at all. So this might be an indication. I need to speed up. I know.
Yes, we want to have some time for Q&A.
Okay, I will speed up. So the most important environment is the 3060 target with carbon neutral. Will be basically driven by economic growth and the carbon neutral growth. Next slide, please. So the total under construction's capacity in China is about 8 gigawatts, I mentioned already. Compared to other countries, China have the majority of the under construction now. Next slide, please. You can see the picture. You will never see any offshore wind site with so many construction happening at the same time. This is the picture been taken before the deadline for the feed-in tariffs, and you can see the list of all the under construction with offshore wind site here. I want to mention one thing quite important. The 5 times the cost increase already dropped after the feed-in tariff rush now. But if you look, now we have a new COVID factor play into this. Very lucky, last year there was an extra about 2 months window, the weather window for the installation. So that's a quite good news. But now this, look at China tidying up for the COVID lockdown index. Just the red line is the China index. You can see it's almost get to 40%. They never ever see such a high number before. So we will see what was the impact later. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, let's look about the future. The basic story here is very simple. With 33% of the global carbon emission and 70% of the global GDP, how to use this global GDP to transfer this big, huge economy to make the 2025 target, because I think the new IPCC report mentioned that 2030 is not good enough. It should be 2025, but the Chinese target is 2030. The peak at 2030, and the majority of the state-owned enterprise utility has not have the 50% renewable target yet. I think altogether about 40 to 50 listed company utility in China, 20 of them is not close to the 50% target. So there's a still huge gap. All those utilities need to meet the 2025, 50% of their generation must coming from the renewable later. So this is to convert from the coal, obviously. Another important factor for the future for the Chinese offshore market is the unorthodox policy making been facilitate Chinese rise for the last 10, 20 years. But now with the central government policy go away, the local government might not want to foot the bills. But how this interaction will play out, nobody knows. Whether the GDP of China going to slow down, and then the consumer not happy to pay the higher price. So all this will be very complicated. Obviously, if we say the next 2030, there's 300 gigawatt of global offshore market in the world, where the Chinese company want to have a big share of that. So the global supply chain and local supply chain will have interaction as well. We can see Mingyang's been opening the factory in Germany, and then sign a MOU with UK, and Siemens closed their stop selling their turbine in China and use China as a manufacturing manufacturing center. And Mingyang supplied 10 units of the 3 megawatt in the first Italy offshore market. All this interaction, that means that the China is not a local country-wise market anymore. The Chinese supply chain want to go global. The last thing I want to mention here is there's one confirmed 300 megawatts offshore wind farm will be built with very low strike price, 0.3, which is about more than 50% lower than the feed-in tariff price. And the 2025 target is a huge difference number from 32 gigawatt to 153. But from our study, we think reasonably we think maybe 10 gigawatts every year for the next 4 or 5 years. So in total, it's 50 gigawatts. I think the last slides I have. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned in the last slides, there's the Chinese market whole supply chain is become a global player, not only because of it's the biggest market, #1 installation in the world at the moment, but also they have the China as a country have quite a big footprint of the capacity of the resource of the mineral. With you can see from the graphs here, I think Ethereum is more than Chile, and then the copper is dominate the whole world. And nickel, we have an incident a couple weeks ago in London. There's metal exchange. Some Chinese companies try to short the nickel, but it's coming to a very complicated issue. But the London metal exchange and stopped the trade, and then it never ever happened in the history. So there's 4 scenarios in this geopolitical energy transition model. Hopefully we will not go into the worst case scenario, but highly likely, I think personally, we are between the not very good and not very bad scenario. Hopefully the wind cost will keep coming down, and the different countries between China, USA, Europe, Russia will working together instead of making all this difficult thing for the planet and the whole industry to work better. Thank you. That's my 20 minutes. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Deng, for that very insightful presentation, taking us through how offshore wind is unfolding in China and how China has taken a lead in offshore wind development. We have time about 4 to 5 minutes for Q&A, so we'll ask a few questions to you. So my first question is, will the future of the offshore wind sector become more open to international players? There is huge potential, but obviously the players are interested. And so what is the policy on that? How are you looking at that?
I think I briefly touched these topics already. GE have a big manufacturing center in Guangdong. I think last month already shipping the 11 megawatts turbine to the Dogger Bank in UK project. So the supply chain in China will still helping the global supply chain to install more offshore wind farm. I think that will happen. No matter, doesn't matter the environment or the geopolitics factor.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Deng. We've also seen now that China has emerged as one of the biggest. It is the leader in offshore wind development, and now that would also mean focusing on O&M and asset management. So how should the developers be looking at their asset management strategy, given the large scale offshore wind capacity that is there?
That's a very good question. I think over the years, when we have different events, have opportunity to talk to the developer in China, what they did over the year is they will have their EPC company within their organization, and then O&M department or company within their organization, and this is the business model they've been using for years. But obviously now suddenly they have such a huge amount of O&M. That's why they will have to change. But I can tell you there are already 1 or 2 consortiums try to put together to list their the platform to doing offshore O&M only in the Chinese stock market already. So they're start changing now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As it also mentioned now that the subsidy is over, but some provinces, like you said, that there's also going to be a focus now by the local provinces to drive offshore wind. Will this lead to any sort of development issues in terms of the overall offshore wind development plans? Do you foresee any of this hampering the plans or coordination issues between the provinces?
I don't think different provinces will have any coordination with the subsidy for the offshore wind. On the contrary, I think they are competing with each other. They are a limited resource in different provinces. They all have their own target. The target from the central government, they need to produce the number every year to say, okay, how many renewable we install, how our utility in our local area been meeting the target. So I think at the moment, Song already have 3 to 4 provinces already declared their subsidy for the offshore wind. All of them, compared to what the central government paying, is nothing. So again, this will all go down to the market.
All right. One last question, and in terms of your outlook, will you be spending your child's inheritance money to invest in the Chinese offshore wind industry on this?
I think I will invest in the Chinese stock market, but maybe in PV, but not offshore wind. The reason behind that is the solar PV is the price dropping quickly, and each of the, if you look at the company, for the people will think, okay, last year the Chinese offshore market is like a big party, loads of installation. But if you go down to each of the company, the listed market, you will see, okay, they have the big turnover, but the profit is not huge. Okay, I suspect most of the not only because of we have mentioned already $500 billion late payment from the central government. Also, there's not much money to be made in the offshore market in China. I know nobody ever said that in any of the event. I'm the first one said that, but I truly believe they are it is important, but it's not a huge amount of money will be made in this sector in the next 10, 20 years. That's my own observation. Thank you. So my children inherit money will not go to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Deng, for an extremely informative presentation and being very candid about how you feel about the offshore wind industry. Thank you so much for joining us today.